Today's episode of Off the Timeline is titled The LSU Decision That Quietly Reshaped the SEC. What if, in the year 2000, Bob Stoops took a job that on paper looked safe? LSU wasn't broken, it wasn't desperate, it wasn't chasing relevance. It was stuck, good enough to matter, too boxed in to lead. And LSU in this parallel universe doesn't hire Bob Stoops because he was flashy. They hired him because he didn't need permission. What LSU didn't realize yet was that this hire wouldn't just change their program, it would quietly force Alabama, Florida, and eventually the entire SEC to change how power worked. This isn't a story about a championship season, it's about how one decision rewired the cost of dominance, and why LSU spent the next 25 years living inside those consequences. But first, let's set the table to LSU before Stoops in this universe. To understand why Stoops mattered, you have to understand where LSU was in the late 90s in this parallel universe. LSU wasn't failing, they were stable, competitive, and occasionally dangerous. But institutionally, they were boxed out. They'd already tried stability hires, charisma hires, recruiting first solutions, and none of it fixed the real problem. LSU didn't control its own leverage. They weren't driving conference conversations. They weren't shaping the future. They were reacting to it. And you may be thinking to yourself, but LSU is winning games. Why panic? Because winning without leverage is a trap. LSU wasn't afraid of losing. They were afraid of becoming manageable. And that sets the table to the Stoops hire. LSU did not hire Bob Stoops to win headlines. They hired him to do something far more dangerous. Turn the program into an institution that did not need favors. Stoops wasn't sold as a savior. He was sold as a systems builder. Defense first, depth always, control over chaos. From day one, LSU stopped behaving like a restless power. They behaved like a program that expected to be there indefinitely. On the field, immediately more disciplined, fewer sloppy losses, games stopped feeling volatile. By 2001, LSU wasn't flashy, but they were unavoidable. And you may be thinking to yourself, isn't this just rewriting real history with a different name? No, because this version of LSU is not defined by a title run, it's defined by structural permanence. That's the difference. And that sets the table to when winning becomes influence. Because by the mid 2000s, something subtle happened. LSU stopped being discussed as a program on the rise and started being treated as a fixed variable. They weren't lobbying, they weren't posturing to leave. They didn't have to, because every SEC plan now had to ask, what does this look like if LSU is strong? 2003, 2005, 2006, LSU was not peaking. They were holding altitude. And that's when Alabama noticed. Not Alabama the brand, Alabama the institution. They didn't copy LSU's playbook. They copied LSU's assumptions. Depth over drama, control over momentum, fatigue as an asset. LSU didn't block Alabama's rise, they showed them how to finish it. And that sets the table to Florida getting squeezed. Florida felt the pressure differently. Speed had been Florida's advantage, space had been Florida's edge. LSU erased both, not with trickery, but with mass, discipline, and time of possession. Florida could still win, but they could not overwhelm. That forced a change, more defensive recruiting, more emphasis on depth, less schematic arrogance. Florida doesn't collapse, but their era of easy leverage ended. And you may be thinking to yourself, isn't this just SEC evolution anyway? Yes, but LSU accelerates the timeline. Without LSU holding the line year after year, speed would have stayed enough. Instead, the league hardened. And that sets the table to dominance having a cost. By the 2010s, LSU and Alabama had won the argument. The league now ran through them, and that created a new problem, burnout. Every game felt like a referendum. Every roster spot carried expectation. Every loss feels louder. LSU doesn't fall off, but the margins shrank. They adapt slowly, slight offensive evolution, cultural continuity, no panic resets. And you may be thinking to yourself, why didn't LSU reinvent itself sooner? Because reinvention is risky when you're already the standard. LSU chose floor over ceiling, and that choice keeps them elite while quietly capping upside. And that sets the table towards the legacy pressure of the 2020s. By the 2020s, LSU's not chasing dominance, they're protecting it. New forces enter the sport: player empowerment, NIL leverage, roster fluidity. Programs that adapted fastest gained flexibility. LSU adapted, but they did so cautiously. They remained a top tier program, structurally sound, universally respected, but no longer inevitable. And that's the final irony. LSU spends decades trying to escape being boxed in. They succeeded, and then they had to figure out how to live without the chaos that wants to find them. And you may be thinking to yourself, so was this all worth it? Yes, because LSU doesn't fade, they endured. This parallel universe does not end with collapse, it ends with a choice. The hardest part of dominance isn't building it, it's knowing when to hand it forward. LSU mastered power, they survived disruption. What comes next is not failure, it's succession. If you like this kind of slow burn institutional what if, the kind that rewards staying with the story, hit like so YouTube knows this is worth surfacing. Drop a comment telling me which decision you think mattered most: the hire, the patience, or the refusal to panic. And if this is your kind of college football storytelling, subscribe, because this channel is all about the choices that felt reasonable and changed everything anyways.